everyone, and welcome to the HBR Arabia and MIT Technology Review Arabia webinar series in partnership with Technology Innovation Institute, TII, based in Abu Dhabi. My name is Solveig Nicholas, your moderator and executive board member with HBR Arabia, and I'm pleased to be your host today with two very distinguished panels on two areas of research: governments and corporates, and initiatives to support and benefit from research, and the research ecosystem itself. How can academia, governments, and corporations make research more relevant? I'd love to take a moment to introduce our partners for today's webinar, ATRC and TII. The Advanced Technology Research Council, ATRC, was established in May 2020 to drive Abu Dhabi's R&D strategy through championing research, driving innovation, and nurturing talent. A cornerstone of this effort is the Technology Innovation Institute, or TII, the applied research pillar of ATRC that drives applied research and the IP development and develops academic and industry partnerships. TII has 7 dedicated centers across 7 national priorities in the UAE, including quantum computing with Professor Jose Ignacio Latorre, who is actually one of our distinguished speakers today, autonomous robotics, cryptography with Dr. Najwa Araj, also one of our speakers today, advanced materials, digital security, directed energy, secure systems. Now let's talk about the global research ecosystem. No one can argue the importance of the research in the 21st century. Research informs our actions in various fields. It helps us understand, make better decisions, and improve our knowledge. It informs our education system, the pipeline of future researchers, experts, and scientists, and it helps our future generations understand more, and really important right now, fear less. Of course, the research must always be of high quality and integrity, and having robust knowledge or technology transfer systems in place helps facilitate the application of this new knowledge outside of the research setting. The people conducting the research must have the freedom to pursue what inspires them within their field of specialization and the autonomy to apply their skills in the world around them for the benefit of society at large. Recently, however, there have been growing apathy within the field of applied research and advanced technology. COVID has turned the entire world upside down. We all know that, and the research industry is no exception. There is one benefit of this, however, and that it has helped us identify flaws in the research ecosystem, and we can have the discussion of how we might further correct them. We are currently dealing with drained morale among scientists who are increasingly distracted by outdated systems and red tape. Countries are losing research scientists due to their contradictory and sometimes very bureaucratic infrastructure, which often prevents the researchers from doing the actual work that they love. Scientists, technologists, and researchers must be in an environment that stimulates, supports, and nourishes their research to make a difference. And the systems and infrastructure ought to facilitate that. Like many industries, they are facing a strategic inflection point, and this is the time for a radical overhaul. Today, we'll be discussing the world's current research landscape and what can be done to improve it, focusing on issues of government and industry involvement as it relates to infrastructure, funding, access to data, policies and regulations, as well as the ecosystem itself and issues related to bureaucracy, access, and availability of talent, flexibility of topic, gender equality, and availability of technological advancements. These are just some of the issues our panelists are going to address today in our quest to better understand the entire research ecosystem from an academic, government, and industry perspective. Before we begin, I'd like to encourage the audience to participate in this conversation by putting questions in the QA box at the bottom. That would be the area that I'm monitoring most closely for questions. We will try to get to as many as possible throughout the discussion, but we have 6 incredibly valuable speakers and a limited amount of time, so we'll hope to get to as much as possible. Our first panel is on governments and corporates initiatives to support and benefit from research, and this includes 3 very distinguished speakers. Professor Jose Ignacio Latorre, Chief Researcher, Technology Innovation Institute, TII's Quantum Research Center based here in Abu Dhabi, Dr. Ott Velsberg, Government Chief Data Officer for the Republic of Estonia, and Professor Ramses Gallego, Gallego, International Chief Technology Officer, CyberRes, and IE professor. Dr. Jose Latorre, as I mentioned, is the chief researcher at TII in the chief researcher at TII's Quantum Research Center, a cutting-edge UAE-based scientific research center. In this role, he is helping both to construct the first quantum computer in the region and to develop a new generation of quantum technologies. A full professor of theoretical physics at the University of Barcelona, currently on leave, Professor Latorre is the founder of the Centro de Ciencias de Benasque Pedro Pascual. I do apologize for some of my pronunciation. An institution that fosters high-level international scientific events. He also was a founder of the NNPDF collaboration, which develops artificial intelligence technology for the treatment of all data coming from the high-energy physics laboratory at CERN. Professor Latorre has written over 130 research papers in international journals on particle physics and quantum information, and has written 3 books on quantum mechanics and the ethics of artificial intelligence. Dr. Ott Velsberg is the Chief Data Officer for the Estonian government. He oversees strategic coordination of data science and data governance in Estonia, including domains like artificial intelligence and open data. He's also a PhD researcher in the departments of informatics at Umeå University and Uppsala University. His research concentrates on the use of information systems in the public sector, with a special focus on the use of Internet of Things. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Ramses Gallego, has over 22 years experience as a security professional with deep expertise in the risk management and governance areas, and is now International Chief Technology Officer for CyberRes, a micro-focused line of business. He is previously the CTO in Symantec, Dell Security, and CA Technologies, regional manager for surf control in Spain and Portugal, and also Chief Strategy Officer of the Security and Risk Management Practices at Intelligy. Dr. Ramses believes that revolution, rather than evolution, is needed when considering the move from technology to enterprise risk, and that the cloud dimension offers incredible opportunity for business today, and thinks the government is essential to facilitate innovation in this changing business environment. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Pleasure. Yeah.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Now, I want to just jump in. Government and industry has always played a key role in research, and as such, but it sees the challenges and opportunities in a unique way. Let's start by asking all of you, are governments and corporations around the world responsible to support research? Should they or can they create an environment that stimulates the field and individual scientists in a way that enables them to be successful? Dr. Ramses, let me start with you. You're the first in my line on the Zoom screen.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having us. It's truly a pleasure to be addressing you today. And I know that I'm among friends and excellent speakers. Let me go straight to the point. I mean, we are living through difficult, challenging times. And if governments of the world, they want to strengthen the economy or make the world a safer place or fight a disease or enhance our national security, let's say, of course they are responsible for that. But in order to do the right research, you have to do the right funding. I know that, I mean, everybody here understands that research takes time, effort, and money. And I'm looking straight into the camera when I'm saying this. You need to fund research in order to get the best of the talent. You know, in my line of work, which is cybersecurity and digital transformation, well, we say at IE University and at CyberRes, I'm micro-focused on the business, but especially at the university, what I'm seeing in higher education is that, I mean, talent is not the problem. Ideas, having the right vision and mission and purpose and promise, that is not the problem. It's the willingness to fund that research. Is what we call, I mean, we live in, again, challenging times. We talk a lot about digital transformation or digital disruption. Well, the name of the game, governments of the world, is radical innovation, doing different things differently. So to your question, Solveig, and I want to hear the rest of my colleagues, but yes, to the question of governments are responsible. We in the industry, we are raising our hands saying, of course, we need to nurture that talent. we at the university, and we do that at IE in something called, that we have a startup incubator, etc., called Area 31. So the answer is yes, but combined with non-for-profits, governments of the world, of course, and the industry again, and governments. But we have a unique opportunity, by the way. Again, in my line of work, which is technology, and Professor Latorre knows a lot on quantum computing and machine learning and artificial intelligence. But what is at stake here is the future of societies at large. So in short, a big yes to the first question of the panel. But I would like to hear my colleagues. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Dr. Jose, just to keep the consistent going across my screen, what are your thoughts on this, sir? You're muted.
You're muted, my friend.
I was saying, hi, Ramses, hi, Ott. Thank you, Solveig. Yeah, let me make a point, only one point, and very clear. I think that when you go to deep tech, which is what I think really matters nowadays, there are different positions for corporations, for governments. They are not necessarily aligned. So a corporation goes for profit, a government goes for the well-being of the citizens. And it may be, there might be a confrontation there. And indeed, in particular, if the country, the government is a country and the corporation is from a different country. So there might be tensions, which are very, very obvious. So this is why I think that, I've been working in several continents myself, not only countries, but continents. And I know about the fight for technological sovereignty. It's a fact that many countries are discussing their investments, their funding of research in terms which have a political side, not only a scientific side. And to summarize it, research produces knowledge, and really knowledge is power. So the power of the next century will be having deep tech in artificial intelligence, in quantum computation, in certain areas of biology. So when you said, is it a duty for corporations and government? I don't think it's a duty, and there is no option. There is absolutely no option. It's not something they have to discuss. It's something they have to think how to articulate, but not the yes or no, because the discussion is not when these things will happen, how they will happen. The question is who will own such technology. I want to listen to Ott.
Dr.
Yes.
Ott, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Pleasure to be here as well. So I'm going to target the question from another perspective. So in Estonia, what we have learned during the last 20 plus years of digitalization is that when it comes to digitalization reforms, it is important to avoid large-scale projects because it often means that the projects failed. And they will fail slowly. They will become a really expensive burden on the public sector. So we have learned really early on that it's better to test with small-scale local projects. And you can still fail, but you fail fast. And the projects themselves are less expensive as a result. And not to design gigantic project, it is often important to start out with research, carrying out R&D projects. And in such cases, the collaboration between public sector and research institutions, that's a crucial factor that we try to enhance in Estonia. So private public sector collaboration, the same collaboration with research institutions, that's a key aspect. So back to the question, Solveig, you asked, the collaboration, that's an important part. In Estonia, that's what's driving us further forward. So thank you.
If I may actually ask you, Dr. As an extension, we have a question from the audience. Samir wants to know, is it the government's responsibility to enforce the collaboration between the stakeholders, the public-private sector? Dr. Jose just referred to them a moment ago, and you just mentioned them as well. I'm curious your position on the ability or need for that to act as a conduit to almost enforce that particular collaboration.
Well, I will be very clear. I think I'm here representing the Technology Innovation Institute from the Emirates, and I think that the duty of the government is to develop an ecosystem. So this is much more than collaborating with a company. An ecosystem includes developing talent, funding ideas, funding startups, relating to large corporations, focusing the research, focusing the funding. So you see, it's very often made look trivial, but this is not how it works. Making an ecosystem is not trivial. You may need facilities. I will give you an example in artificial intelligence. You want to have natural language processing, which is a fundamental element of that. You need a supercomputing center. So you rather develop an ecosystem. A piece of it is relating the public research to the corporations that will try to make products. But it's a little bit, I would say, much more complex and very nice, by the way. It's great to develop an ecosystem in the country.
Oh, Solveig, if I may say something.
Please.
Oh, no, just because, as always, Professor Latorre inspires me to say something. And you know, when he was talking about an ecosystem, I was smiling and taking my notes here because I'm learning. Basically, I'm here to learn. But let me share with the audience my idea, especially in research, of an ecosystem. An ecosystem allows us to be, and yes, I'm playing a little bit with the dictionary here, but an ecosystem allows us to be systematic and systemic. Let me repeat. An ecosystem allows us, and especially in research, to be systematic, meaning automation, orchestration, governance, the different parties that you were mentioning, by the way, you know, and the question was about governments, you know, enforcing and coordinating. So orchestration, automation, because an ecosystem allows us to be systematic. But in the very same way, and going back to Professor Latorre's point, an ecosystem allows us to be systemic. Am I right? Systemic, the dictionary says, is it belongs to a greater vision. It belongs to a greater good, if I may call it like that, you know, solving a problem, you know. So systematic and systemic, belonging to a system, and you're talking about the ecosystem, and I think that's very important. And as Odd was saying, coming from Estonia, a country that certainly has the visibility and the reach, and it deserves, you know, that recognition that you guys are doing great. But, you know, that sort of public and partner-private, that idea of the ecosystem that Professor Latorre was mentioning, I wanted to share that with the audience, you know, automation, orchestration, governance, and then belonging to an overarching umbrella of a greater good. So I think that that's important. But back to you. Yeah, back to you.
So I'm going to jump in as well. So
Good.
I'm just going to follow up that, in my opinion, the government must interfere when necessary and provide the means to either attack the resources or when access to data is limited. And in Estonia, we have kind of our initiatives have been targeted on those specific areas. So for instance, if we want to give access to genome biobank that we have in Estonia, so 1/6 of people have donated their genome data, but we want them to be empowered to decide how the data is going to be used, then for that reason, we developed consent management. So they can now give researchers access to their genome data. So that's kind of the approach that the government can take. So when we see some kind of limitations, we previously talked about language technology. Here again, we are defining language resources, language corpora, as high-value data set. So they must be free of charge for everyone in a certain format. So that is one type of a way that the government can interfere. So when we see some kind of blockers, we should interfere.
You are muted.
It's inevitable. I have yet to be in a meeting, a conversation, or a webinar where that has not happened multiple times. But anyway, my apologies. So Dr. Odd, if I could extend on that conversation, you know, we've had some questions from the audience so far asking, you know, the ecosystem, academic, government, industry is a virtuous circle. And I'll probably end up asking all of you to address this. But where should, you know, so Paul asked the question and some others have asked similar questions. Because Estonia has such a unique approach to technology and research in that ecosystem, where do you find that virtuous cycle to start? Within academia, within government, within industry, all of the above? What would be the most, and how has Estonia specifically tried to capitalize that to make you a hub for research and technology?
So myself, I'm quite practical. So I love applied research. And that inevitably means that we start often the projects that I'm together with my team are involved in, start with a business problem. So answer to your question, it starts from the public sector or from the private sector. That's typically one of the starting points. Of course, we are more than happy to collaborate with research. So if there is some specific hypothesis or a problem that they want to solve together with the public sector, we are always eager to be involved. But it really starts from our end, typically with a business problem that we want to solve. Whether it is in AI, whether it is in cybersecurity, the problem statement itself comes from the business side. So that gives a little bit more value for the public sector and also drives kind of innovative projects that in the end are practically put in use. So that's a really simple way that we are approaching it. And it's more cost efficient for us in that way, from government perspective, not from the research.
And actually, if I can add something, if I may, Solveig, very rapidly. I mean, when I was preparing for this fantastic panel, again, thank you for having me. I was writing my 5 pillars of research, which actually addresses the question and goes and capitalizes on what Odd was saying, which is, okay, we at the university, we ask ourselves the following question: where are the skills? Where is the interest? Where's the expertise? Where's the motivation? Usually, as Otto is saying, in the industry, sometimes in the government, because we want to solve something, and creativity. Let me repeat, where are the skills? Who has the skills? Who has the interest, which is super important in order to fund, and so what's in it for me, expertise, motivation, and creativity, which I think it summarizes. If you ask these fundamental universal questions, I think that part of the equation for funding, it's kind of solved, or at least is in the right path. Skills, interest, expertise, motivation, and creativity. Back to you. Yep.
Thank you. And Dr. Jose, if I could actually throw it a little bit over to you, because you're in a unique position having, as a faculty and now, in a kind of semi-government scientific research institution in an organization that is focused very heavily on the national agenda as well as the scientific agenda. I'm curious how you have seen this model. How is this model applied? How has it been successful? What pieces of the ecosystem do you see evolving maybe in TII, and how is that beneficial?
Well, that's a long question, but I try always to be very short. The problem is that there is no tradition in research, in basic research in the Emirates. So this is why we need a TII and we need ATRC. We need to build this ecosystem, need also these governing bodies. Okay, so this is the first step, and we are in the first year. But let me mention 2 things which I think are fundamental that they were not there, at least when I came, which is the priorities. So very many people think, okay, we have money, let's work on, I will use quantum computation, which is what we not have, and let's look who is doing that in the country, how they can do, how we can help. Well, this is the first step. This is exactly the opposite. If you want to attack something relevant like quantum computation, which is a battle in the planet, okay, first you need talent. And then you bring talent from wherever you want. Then you listen to them, what should be done. And third, you provide the funding in the just sufficient funding. It's not about hype and producing numbers which are not realistic. So this is the first thing. In my opinion, the right order is first talent, then the ideas of the right people, and then you fund them. You're guaranteed to succeed. Just the opposite as many people think. In particular in corporations, you think the opposite way. We have an extra money. Why don't we do something in artificial intelligence? Who could do that? It's the wrong way, in my way. And the second is that few people understand how dangerous bureaucracy is. When a scientist spends the day discussing with the legal department, with the procurement, with the human resources, with the marketing, then 80% of his time is not being productive. So you have to provide an environment which is appropriate for the goal, the challenge that you're pursuing. You want to have top level, absolutely edge knowledge. Come on, do it. Don't bring, the procurement procedures which are inherited from 19th century structures. And this is a big problem in many countries in Europe, in the large countries, in the large organizations, at CNRS, at INFN, at the big places, because we are inheriting this bureaucracy. So you have to be lean, agile, fast, adaptive. So how you combine these things, I think it's about focus and understanding. It's really, really, really understanding what is to generate knowledge. I think that the virus is teaching many people that they had invested a lot of money and they are unable, many countries, to generate a vaccine. How come? Because of all these problems that I mentioned. And finally, it goes to the places where there were real research. Okay.
I'm fascinated, and we could probably spend an entire webinar just on the discussion of the issues of bureaucracy, procurement, my personal favorite, and other areas, and how they are inhibiting organizations in general, not just scientific, but to your point, it's criminal when a scientist spends 80% of his time in bureaucracy, because honestly, that is not why you went into science in the first place. And
I don't want to interfere a lot, but let me say that the European Union, the big money that is in the big project, let me fed open, one of the major things. The return, the number of grants approved was 7%. So 93% of the time of lots of great scientists is simply thrown away. So how come that we accept that this is a normal thing of proceeding? Okay, this is simply wrong. Countries like Estonia have an advantage. They can eliminate that much easier.
Well, and to that point, it leads beautifully into the idea of, funding drives subject. He who gets the money gets to do the research. And that is, shall we say, a questionable approach to the most valuable research that comes out of it, both from just the potential influence of government, the potential influence of special interests, and then of course, just it could be strictly by accident. I'm curious from any of your perspectives, because you all have a very unique, both academic and then Dr. Ott, more government focus, but with an academic mind towards it. How is anyone hurdling, kind of overcoming that hurdle? Who is doing, what organizations are doing it best? And are countries specifically using that as a strategic advantage to reverse the brain drain, if you will, to attract talent into their country, into their ecosystem? I throw it to the floor. I don't know who might be the best to address that.
I can tell you a lot.
Okay.
Go,
Ramses. No. Thank you, Jose Ignacio. Basically, I want to start, and again, sure my colleague will have something to say, but I mean, I always think about the triad, the important triad that probably everybody knows the first part of the equation, which is people, process, and technology. In order to nurture talent, to attract talent, I am sitting here in Barcelona, Spain, and unfortunately, I have to say that we lose talent to other places of the world with better funding, better, well, certainly not better climate, but the rest probably is good. But what I'm saying is people, process, and technology. Okay, everybody understand that, that's important, I mean, deep on the technology, the resources available, okay. But what happened with the conversation of the other triad? So the other triangle that I'm putting on top, which is culture, structure, and strategy. Culture, structure, and strategy, either from a government perspective or from an industry perspective, the network of people, again, resources and nurturing, higher education, as I was saying, and I'm representing today, IE University, that's fundamental, to have the right, incubation, startup network, the right opportunities, not only the talent, which is critical for success, as Professor Latorre was saying, but, people, process, and technology combined with the right approach, the right culture, structure, and strategy. And then, although this is not another triad, but then I would like to play the idea here, or at least to throw it to our delegate, which is strategy is very important. Tactics are equally important, like in chess. I mean, you define a strategy. I mean, government, you define a long-term vision, but then the tactics, how we are going to do it. Actually, another triad, if I can bring it, and I'm going to shut my mouth to hear the rest of my colleagues, but projects, programs, portfolio. So a project usually projects in plural, they should belong with the right approach to a program. And different programs belong to an overarching vision, which is a portfolio. Are we having that discussion when we do research, especially in the worlds of quantum computing or artificial intelligence and supervised machine learning, this sort of things? Are they seen in silos, too vertical, or they become to a project program portfolio sort of thing? So in order to retain that talent that my colleagues were mentioning, in order to nurture, so that idea of culture, structure, strategy, and then tactics, I think Solveig and dear delegates this is super important and instrumental for success. Back to you.
So I'm going to jump in, but from another, perhaps different angle. So in Estonia, we don't have a lot of funding, nor do we have a lot of people. So we have 1.3 million people, so not that much actual horse or work power. But we have something else, and what we can provide. And that's an agile, innovative ecosystem mindset. We are open for collaboration. We have access to data. We are really great at copying things. So if someone has in a lab thought of something, then we are really quick to actually put it in practice in use. So this is another perspective how countries can actually play for their own strength. We are small, but we are agile and quick. And as a result, when it comes to research, I would just like to clarify that for us, it doesn't need to be always universities. That's a kind of a typical mindset that universities are research labs. But for us, a research project grants can also be provided to companies that are open to collaborating and they are interested in research and the R&D and so forward. So we need to extend kind of the view that the research only typically happens in universities. It's not like that. It's a more extensive landscape. Thank you.
Thank you. And you'll be happy to know, Dr. Jose, that Dr. Leitha, one of our audience members, agrees that professors spending their time with bureaucracy is a criminal waste of time. So we are getting huge support from the academic community for that particular concept. So you're in good company there. And to that, I wanted to actually extend, you talked about the government creating the ecosystem. We've talked about the different pieces of the ecosystem. And Rayan from our audience has asked, is there a real or imagined conflict of interest between the government, academia, the private sector, all as part of this ecosystem? How do we reconcile those things? Is that a government responsibility through policies, through government mandates, regulations, or policies, or does it need to be self-regulating?
If I have a saying, I come back to the relevant point. What matters is talent. Okay, that's what matters. So if you have talent in your country, if you have talent in Estonia, and the guy had an idea at a university and wants to make a company, a startup, please make it easy. Make it easy. Okay, this is the opposite as what you were saying. Solveig is exactly what happens in many countries. There are plenty of regulations of incompatibilities that you have a double interest. Come on, there are very few people with ideas, very few. Why don't you take them and you really support them? You ask them what would be the nice way to do that. I will give you an example, which is what we are trying to do in TII and also in Barcelona, which is we generate a quantum computer, the IP is generated in a center. The society is served by another quantum computer of production, which is sitting in a supercomputing center. But this supercomputing center does not want to call the scientists to solve a problem about this thing. So the way it works is the IP goes into startups and spin-offs that do make a product, which is then sold to the supercomputing center and served. So you see, this is ecosystem. You generate IP, you transfer to the companies make the product. It is served to the community as a service by a facility. That's what you have to do. If you have the guy who is able to generate IP, make it easy for him to make the startup, the spin-off, to connect with the supercomputing center. Don't stop him. It's about collaborating, growing, not about limiting, cutting the talent you have. I think this is the big thing. Again, talent, then their ideas, and then help.
Unfortunately here, Solveig, I want to bring the angle, and I hate it, because I'm a pacifist, and I'm not a politician. So, but I need to bring politics in here. So in order to, when I'm asked the question on, conflict of interest, I have to say, and I say it in a generic fashion. So I'm not going to mention any country on the planet because it would be unfair. But it's also true that especially with disruptive thinking, disruptive innovation, and the things that Professor Latorre was mentioning, geopolitics and political interest play a role in here, especially if this is government backed or some companies that are close to the government. So I just want to drop the card on the table. Food for thought. This is what this panel is about, that sometimes that conflict of interest happens because of, geopolitics and different interests, and you want to call it world supremacy or whatever we want to call it, But I think that's an angle that we shouldn't be forgetting, because after the money, there's, okay, what's in it for me? Intellectual property that Professor was mentioning. So I just wanna our audience today not to forget that, unfortunately, that is also within the equation of funding and what am I getting from, etc. and world dominance as well. So, but back to you. Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to
Dr. Ott so politely.
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly jump in.
Go ahead, please go ahead. I love it.
So I really support what you right now said, and this is one of the problems I see that right now happens in the world. So whether we take the States, Europe, the world, so we are limiting the possibilities for data sharing. We are limiting the possibilities to use different public cloud service providers. In Europe, we have Data Governance Act that foreseeably kind of puts on limits on sharing data with third countries outside of Europe. That's nonsense. That's a protectionism in its mightiest glory in many ways. And we have other similar initiatives happening. So I see that we are right now moving more towards making things more bureaucratic. You need to go through different holes to actually get things done. Whether it is in a procurement, there are new regulation coming in from the door, from the window, and everything takes longer. So we need to be more liberal, more agile, and really, in a good, honest sense, believe that people are not always out to hurt others or carry out projects in a wrongful matter. So I see that we are moving towards being a lot more slower in innovation.
If I could ask as a continuation of that thought, because if COVID proved nothing, it's that working globally is certainly a possibility. So much of the, what you yourselves are doing is not necessarily dependent on being in the same room together to do the research. But what I'm gathering from what you're saying as a group is that even in an era where the ability to communicate and collaborate is greater, the access to the data, the nationalism, the control over that, because it is viewed narrow-mindedly as a strategic asset for a country, even though not recognizing that the sum would be much greater than the parts if we were able to work in aggregate across boundaries with international information and the rest. So am I correct in saying, this is a concern you have, the ecosystem is actually narrowing, not growing because of, recently?
Absolutely. And we see similar things when it comes to, for instance, open data. So from a national perspective, countries understand that open data is an important factor, both for the research, for the private sector, and so forward. But then the national protectionism side pops out that says other countries, other companies with perhaps more resources can then use that data as well. So then they step back and say, we should not right now open up that data. If we do that, perhaps there should be a control mechanism. So this is from one side. Now we are everyone understands we need to collaborate, but we are taking steps back sometimes. And that's a really unfortunate thing to see. And
Professor Jose, if I could ask you, maybe slightly more narrow question specific to GCC, the emerging markets, the UAE, in which there isn't necessarily a historic ecosystem. Policies, regulations, et cetera, are being sort of created a little bit as we go. Are you seeing similar philosophy, or are you seeing it kind of expanding because they're trying to use it as a strategic differentiator in some way?
I'm a newcomer to the GCC region, only a year, but the change is obvious to me. I mean, even I can see how things are changing for the good, may I say. Okay, but I want to bring a subtle point that I think it's not often emphasized enough. People confuse information with knowledge. You know, many people think that because you have access in internet to the Wikipedia, you know how to do a surgery. This is wrong, okay? You can have zillions of videos, you cannot do anything. So, and the virus is showing something. You may have zillions of institutes or zillions of places, but they do not generate knowledge, they buy knowledge. So this is the huge difference I would like to emphasize with your question. I know it doesn't sound direct answer, but I think it's the profound answer. What you have to do is to develop the way of science to be able to generate knowledge yourself. Then you participate in the ecosystem, in the global ecosystem. If not, you will never enter the doors of the temples of knowledge. You will never. You know, the deep departments where really the good people are, the ones that are addressing the big issues. To enter there is not about money, it's about developing your country, the knowledge, so that you can now relate to them. This is the way. So I think it's often emphasized the role of, you know, sharing data, and data is a plain thing. You really need to know what to do with the data. You need the knowledge, you need the expertise, you cannot buy solutions. You have to find, even if it is painful, you have to find the solution yourself. And believe me, Soviet, we will have a quantum computer created in the Emirates. This is my purpose. I don't care about all the problems I'm finding. We will have it. We will create knowledge. Okay, we will develop the talent locally. I think this is what is needed. Then you will participate in the world. Okay, it comes after that.
Well, and I think that is very exciting. I look forward to seeing it. I have been in the region myself for about 12 years, so I will, and I live not far from TII, so I will look forward to seeing that announcement. The audience agrees completely with the need for talent development, talent identification as the driver for much of the research ecosystem. And unfortunately, with that, we're coming to the end of this particular panel. I want to give each of you just a quick moment to kind of a final word of what you think might be the most critical takeaway from a discussion like this for our audience. And thank you to the audience for their active participation, and my apologies for not getting to so many of their questions. But again, just going in order of my Zoom, Dr. Ramses, last thoughts for the panel.
All right, let me finish with a couple of sentences, if I may. You know, I'm sorry because there's a little noise in the building now, but if you can hear me properly, I will go on. But I do apologize. I can do nothing. It's it's a building. So having said that, very rapidly, two quotes. One comes from Albert Einstein, and he defined craziness as keeping doing the same things and expecting different results. That's being kind of crazy, right? So, and Odd was saying, and Professor Latorre was saying that we have a lot of administrative bureaucracy. We keep doing the same things, and we expect that, you know, nurturing and creating knowledge. And he was saying another thing will happen by magic. No, we need to approach different things differently. You know, so that Einstein quote came to my mind, you know, as a closing comment. But another one, because I'm sitting here in Barcelona, and because of COVID, you know, I mean, at least me, I have not been traveling for the past 16 months, that's a tragedy. Trust me, I was on a plane every single day of my life in my previous life. But in any case, you know, because I'm sitting here in Barcelona, I want to mention Antonio Gaudi, which was the architect of Barcelona. He created very beautiful buildings and hallmarks, etc. So really landmarks of the city. He left us with, the guy was obsessed with nature. And there's a sentence saying, originality consists on returning to the origin. Originality, we want to be cool, we want to be modern and fresh in research. It goes back to going back to the origin. That's being original. And at the origin, research was about solving a problem, a business problem, as Odd was saying, fighting a disease, solving an issue of society at large, or societies at large. So originality consists in returning to the origin. And from my university, it was a pleasure to be here with you today. And with the rest of the speaker, I want to hear their final comments. Thank you for having me. Back to you, Solveig. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Dr. Ott, next in line.
Yes, thank you. So I'm just going to end up with one quote from Mark Twain, who said that if you want to change the future, you must change what you're doing in the present. And in Estonia, we make maximum use of ICT so that smart solutions could be used to increase people's livelihoods, quality of life, employment. So think ahead and think in a practical terms, and keep it in simple. So that's kind of my takeaway from today's discussion. But it has been a great discussion. Pleasure to meet all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And Professor Jose, you get the last words, sir.
Thank you. Well, I would like to talk to the heart of the Emirati people. We keep discussing politics, how to do things, but behind all that is the real pleasure of discovery, the real pleasure of science. So I'd like, the Emirati people to feel ownership of what they are doing. They are trying to do something which is amazing, which is create science at the edge. Such a beautiful concept. It gives meaning to us as humans. So I simply want them to know that this is happening in the country. So I think this is a wonderful thing.
Well, I don't think we could have ended it on a more lovely note. So thank you all, Professor Ramses, Dr. Ott, and Professor Jose, for this very interesting panel. I can see now that our technology people behind the scenes are bringing in our second panel speakers. So I wish you all well, and it was a great opportunity to have this conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks for having me.
And now we will move on to our second panel as our technology team bring them online. Our second panel today is on the research ecosystem and has three more renowned speakers. Dr. Najwa Araj, Chief Researcher for Cryptology Research Center at Technology Innovation Institute, TII, based in Abu Dhabi. Dr. Godfrey Gaston, Executive Director for the Institute of Electronics, Communications, and Information Technologies, ESIT. And Dr. Phil Budden, a senior lecturer at MIT's Management Group in Sloan's Technology Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Strategy Group, or TIES. Dr. Najwa leads the research and development of I'm not in this industry, my apologies very much for that, cryptography and quantum communication technologies, including post-quantum cryptography, software libraries, and hardware implementations, lightweight cryptographic libraries for embedded and RF systems, cryptoanalysis, quantum key distribution, quantum random number generation, and applied machine learning for cryptographic technologies. Dr. Araj earned a PhD with highest distinction in applied cryptography and embedded system security from Princeton University. She has extensive experience in applied cryptography, trusted platforms, security architecture for embedded system, software exploit detection, and prevention systems and biometrics. She has over 15 years of experience with global firms working in multiple geographies from Australia to the United States. Dr. Godfrey Gaston is the Executive Director of the Institute for Electronics, Communication, and Information Technology. He's also the user lead for the Global Innovation Institute, GII, a multidisciplinary research and innovation institute based at ESIT and part of the Belfast Region City deal. His current interests include developing models for commercialization and innovation within a research ecosystem, leading to economic development and the linking of cyber innovation systems internationally. Dr. Godfrey co-founded the startup company Titan IC, recently acquired by Mellonix Technologies, NVIDIA. And finally, Dr. Phil Budden is a senior lecturer at MIT's Management School in Sloan's Technology, Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Strategies Group, where he focuses on innovation, especially for corporate and government executives. Focusing on the executives in both the private, corporate, and public government sectors, Dr. Phil demystifies the process of innovation, setting it as a spectrum of activities ranging from incremental little I innovation out to transformational big I innovation. the innovation challenge for those in larger enterprises with an established business as usual legacy IT systems and complex structures is often how to capture some of the agility and risk tolerance of startup entrepreneurs. In line with the MIT approach to innovative ecosystems, Dr. Phil combines academic, historical, and real-world perspectives in his teaching about how the 5 different ecosystem stakeholders, including entrepreneurs, universities, and risk capital providers, alongside corporate enterprises and government policymakers, could all contribute to successful innovation in regional ecosystems around the world. Dr. Phil holds a BA and MA in history from Lincoln College, the University of Oxford, an MA in history and government from Cornell University, and a PhD in history and international politics from the University of Oxford. I'm sorry, of international political economy from the University of Oxford. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, Solveig.
Thank you for that kind introduction.
Thank you. And I do hope to never say cryptography again.
It's a tricky one.
It is. I apologize for that. But it is a pleasure to have you all here. This panel is, of course, as you all know, and now our audience will know, is about the research ecosystem and how it is undergoing rapid change and transformation as a result of many different factors: scientific and technical advancements, population shifts, increased interest in government and corporations towards innovation, and most recently, of course, the pandemic. Universities historically play an important part and act as stepping stones to educating about the importance of research, as well as fostering the talent necessary for that research ecosystem. Given the importance of research, it is vital that the infrastructure remain vibrant and healthy. So let's jump into the conversation and clarify, what is the research ecosystem? How is it changing, and what will that mean? So let me put it to the floor to say, what is that ecosystem to you? How would you define it? Let me go left to right on my screen. Dr. Najwa, the floor is yours.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you very much, Solveig, for having me here. Obviously, a lot has been said in the previous panel about the ecosystem, what an ecosystem means. So let me try to summarize and add my personal thoughts on this. So a research ecosystem is a collaborative effort between universities, research institutes, industrial partners, private institutions, and funding bodies, whether this is a governmental funding body or a VC or a private funding body. And the aim of this research ecosystem usually, and the collaboration between, and this tight collaboration between these players is, one is prioritizing research roadmaps at the level of countries and at the global level as well, in a way where you are filling technology gaps, where you are developing sovereign technologies and sovereign innovation, and at the same time actually contribution to innovation and new technologies, whether this is for improving societal impact, for improving technologies for critical infrastructures, and the rest. Then after the identification of this roadmap, the ecosystem, or the various players in the ecosystem, we actually need to identify the outcome that should go into conceptualization, proof of concepts, etc. There was lots of mention of intellectual property, so generation of IP is very important. And then this IP that is developed would either be licensed to existing players, that established industrial players, or it will be spun off to new startups, and the technology will be developed. One important point that I noted from the previous panel is what was mentioned about the collaborative learning and the knowledge transfer. And in this type of models, whether you're sharing knowledge or you're sharing information, even though there was a point on the difference between information and knowledge, wherever privacy is a concern, there are federated models to deal with this. So this is, for me, the definition of an ecosystem. Now, what is usually missing from a definition of an ecosystem are two things. Today, we have excellent research that is producing good scientific results that actually is leading to higher speed and innovation. However, the various ecosystems that happen, they don't have a collaborative manner in order to measure the impact of this research. So, there are various players, and usually when you have various players, you need some sort of a feedback loop in order for each player to do the right, let's say, the right action course. And the second one has to do with the talent. Today, a lot of countries have defined their research roadmap. However, the pool of talent is quite scarce. And it's important to reshape the curricula in universities, or even from private institutions, in order to accommodate for the new skills that we need, whether in quantum, whether in crypto and cyber, machine learning, robotics, etc. So that, we ensure scientific growth at a local and a global level, and then we ensure that we have the right scientific knowledge in the right topics.
Thank you very much. Dr. Phil, if I may ask you to go next.
Sure. Thank you for that. And wonderful to be on this panel with Najwa and Godfrey. And that was such a full answer. I'm the historian in the midst here, and I spent my career both as a national diplomat and then a corporate executive. So I don't come with a technical background in these two-syllable technologies, quantum, crypto, AI, 5G, choose that. But what I do spot is there's a lot of buzzwords around, and one of the buzzwords is ecosystems. And so we at MIT have had a go, and I'll just put it in the chat. We did some studies of ecosystems and an approach looking at tech innovation since the Industrial Revolution of the 18th century to come up with an approach to innovation, which the professors here at MIT do a lot of. And then the key aspects here are that innovation is a very real phenomenon. Research is one input to it, and so universities have a key role. But when we look at ecosystems, they tend to be smaller regions. And so America has some regions which are innovative, like here, MIT, Kendall Square, bits of Britain, Belfast that Godfrey will talk about, the Emirates, Silicon Valley. But innovation is not spread around the world. And so it's quite interesting using our ecosystem approach to work out who is going to be innovative in this coming decade. And it's not necessarily going to be the places that have been good at the past. And the other thing I would say is we're quite inclusive with innovation. We believe in 5 stakeholders. So not just the triple helix from the last century of governments, corporates, and universities. We actually think, and if I can, we actually think you need to introduce the entrepreneur and her startup, and also risk capital amongst the various startups. So only when you have all 5 stakeholders together do you see the success that we want to see. And we found this working in the Emirates and Saudi, and assalamu alaikum to my many friends there. And so we think this is a very exciting time to be understanding innovation, understanding why some ecosystems do well and others don't. And I'm delighted to be on this panel to share my historian, non-technical perspective.
Dr. Godfrey, please.
Well, thank you both for that introduction. Maybe if I can just follow on a little bit around our experience in Belfast and Northern Ireland around developing an ecosystem, and I guess this is specifically around growing a cybersecurity ecosystem in the region. So I can't claim credit for this next description, but I think it's a great one that I picked up many years ago, and it's around what's the difference between research and innovation. And we talk about research and innovation in many ways, but what actually does all that mean? And the analogy, which I think is a really helpful one, is research is taking large sums of money and creating a small number of ideas, and innovation is taking a small number of ideas and creating large sums of money. And I know that's a little bit simplistic, but it's actually, the point I want to make is it's 2 different processes, it's different types of people, it's different engagement. And to expect our academic colleagues to be able to do all that innovation and the entrepreneurship and everything on top of their heavy teaching and research loads is very, very difficult. So one of the models that we've implemented at the Institute is to employ a large team of experienced engineers and commercial staff who actually do the innovation. So it's really simple, but it's basically, if you want innovation to happen, you employ people in the Research Institute to make it happen. And that's key to then creating the startups, that's key to engaging with industry, and then attracts more talent. And then you get into this virtuous circle where more people come to the region, etc. So I think that's a really important point, I think, to be able to differentiate and understand that. And I think the one other point, and then I will be quiet. I mean, I think the one thing I would also mention on top of what Phil described is that in my analysis of ecosystems around the world, and particularly innovation ecosystems, quite often different regions have different models. So the 5 model, and maybe in one region, the research or the academic might lead the ecosystem. Somewhere else, it might be government-led. Somewhere else, it might be industry-led. So I guess there are different variations around that 5 theme model that Phil talked about. And I think the important point for the most successful ones, they all have somebody, what I call conducting the orchestra. So there's somebody who's responsible for the administration of the ecosystem, the mailing list, all the practical things. And the most successful are the ones that are the most coordinated and have somebody managing that. So I'm happy to talk in more detail about some of the experiences in Belfast, but as an introductory piece, that's probably my thoughts on the ecosystems.
Well, and to that point, actually, it's a beautiful segue into the next piece, which is what are the most successful ecosystems in your experiences? Where are they emerging? What is the potentially greatest risk to the current, the ones, the Silicon Valleys, the ones that everyone knows about, that I think, Dr. Phil, you're the one who mentioned that they may or may not be the leaders in the next iteration of them. So let me actually then, Dr. Phil, start with you. What do you think are the greatest success stories, maybe more interestingly, the greatest failures, and where do you think that is evolving and where should we be paying attention?
Sure, great question. First of all, history, tech innovation, started in Britain, and for a long time, people didn't think they could catch up with the tech innovation of Manchester, England. Of course, it was overtaken. And so sometimes as a European sitting here in America, there is a sense that Silicon Valley is there forever. And I think the history of tech innovation tells us that it doesn't stay that way. In fact, many say that we may have reached peak valley. And now I think this is a really positive message for us in the rest of the world, because I think things were shifting in the 21st century. We've seen wonderful cybersecurity work in Belfast and Barcelona and Estonia. We've seen the Emirates doing amazing work in deep tech. And so I think innovation is not just going to be stuck in places like Silicon Valley. I think there's an opportunity for ecosystems around the world to have a shot at this. But I know it's going to be quite difficult for those regions. So I'm sitting here in my office at MIT. We never really closed for the pandemic. We had people working on vaccines and things like that, which seemed quite useful. And I think we're going to see the ecosystem logic is going to survive the pandemic. While some digital things, maybe some AI, some TikTok dancing apps can be produced on a laptop anywhere when Starbucks or whatever opens again, an awful lot of the meaningful technologies like cybersecurity, like quantum and cryptography that Najwa are working on are going to continue to concentrate, as tech innovation always has, in certain ecosystems. And so I think it's, as Godfrey was saying, it's important for all the different stakeholders in the ecosystem to rally to the leadership of whoever their local group is to work out where are they going to be in this very competitive environment. I think the exciting things for panelists is these things are in play. There is no quantum capital in the world. And I think the Emirates is going to put on a very good show. Cybersecurity has concentrated in certain places, but AI and other aspects of machine learning are much more distributed. And so I think there's a real opportunity for lots of places to be the hotspots in the coming decade.
If I may, Dr. Najwa, I mean, I think it's fair to say that you are in a hotspot at the moment, or at least an organization that is trying to become grow as a hotspot at the moment. If I could ask, what differentiates this region, the UAE and TII specifically?
Look, I think for us as an emerging research institute and the whole ecosystem that is building up quite nicely, and actually I'm proud to be part of it here in the UAE, there is a realization of what worked and what didn't work in ecosystems that have been developed around the world. For me, I could summarize, the 3 factors of importance that would make a research ecosystem flourish. And, the one that learns from the positive aspects of of other benchmarks, and then, trying to mitigate the impact of the negative aspects of the rest. One is, what is very important is for a research ecosystem to succeed is to have the right players and to attract the right talent, and also to be able to retain this talent. And this is, I would say, this is the most important factor in driving an ecosystem forward and the impact of this ecosystem forward. So what this means is that you will need a value of inclusivity. Dr. Phil mentioned about, inclusive excellence before. This means that you need diversity, and at the same time, this means that you need a global reach. So today, what we do at TII, we have actually a global team that is composed of UAE experts as well as other global experts. We have access to relationships and collaborations with academic institutions and research institutions across the world. So whether this is in the East or in the West, so we are quite inclusive about that. And at the same time, we have gathered boards of advisors, or basically scientific boards also that are composed of global experts in each of the different fields of the 7 centers that you have mentioned at the beginning. A second point, which is very important, and Professor Jose Ignacio mentioned it, is that you need a straightforward access to research funds without exaggerated admin overheads. So, today, even though the amount of funds has increased globally, because you have so many entities that are competing to this fund, per entity basis, the fund is scarce. So you see lots of brilliant minds, scientists, that spend 80 or 90% of their time in the administrative process of getting this fund. And on top of that, because the number of these institutions increase, they have to comply with certain regulations, they have to comply with certain reporting, which take a bit more of their time also on this administrative process of getting the fund. So this part by itself is a big impediment to researchers and scientific minds. And this is actually something that we're very careful about here in the local ecosystem, is that we have put together a comprehensive research roadmap along the 7 areas that you mentioned earlier, and we have put them with the appropriate budget. We're lucky that we have a management that realizes the importance of us focusing on the work versus on the administrative aspect. And then this allows the researchers to invest time and effort effectively and efficiently. And the third point, to have this successful ecosystem, is what I mentioned before: inclusivity, diversity in the talent, and also the sharing of knowledge, whether it is between the local players or other global players and other ecosystems globally.
I am frantically scribbling more questions down as we go through this. And I will be coming back to the comments you made several times about diversity and in a moment. But before we get to, and you have mentioned very well the, kind of the unique model that TII is approaching this with and how they are making a shift. Dr. Godfrey, I think you mentioned, the model in Belfast working very well. And I'm curious, before we shift off the topic of the ecosystem models, if you could just, give us a few examples of how that ecosystem might differ from others, and how is that making it successful?
Yes, thank you. And I think probably to give examples of the ecosystem in Belfast. So just to give you some context, I guess we go back 10 years, there were no cybersecurity companies at all within the region. Now there are over 100 cybersecurity companies employing almost the latest count, nearly 2,500 people in the region. And so why has it been so successful? I mean, I think it's not easy. I mean, it's some of the things that Phil has already talked about, but I would say part of the reason for the success has been excellence in the research. So if you don't have excellence in the research, then clearly the innovation and everything that follows on from that is a problem. So that research excellence is absolutely fundamental. So, you can have all the innovation in the world, but if you don't have that base of research, then you've got a problem. So I would say number one is excellence in research, but then very quickly, the innovation is the engine that keeps everything going. So government can put lots of money in to fund ecosystems, and maybe it can kickstart these ecosystems, but the innovation is that engine that kind of keeps everything moving. And so when government takes money away and they can't fund these forever, then it needs to be able to be self-sustaining as an ecosystem in its own right. And I think that innovation is absolutely critical. So again, looking at some of the best regions in the world, I think where the innovation is key, the ecosystems are strong. And the third point, and I guess this is where Belfast and Northern Ireland has a strength, and we've talked about this before, is maybe the small region is a lot easier. So, to have an ecosystem in London, or to have an ecosystem which even in Silicon Valley, Silicon Valley is not really an ecosystem in a sense, because it's so vast in its own right. It's nearly like a separate country. So I know you could argue Silicon Valley is an ecosystem, but I would actually argue it's kind of gone beyond an ecosystem because it's so large. So that intimacy of relationship and that ability to do things on a small scale, I think, has also meant that Belfast has also benefited from that. So I think that certainly has helped. So I think there's no one factor. I think it's a combination of some of the factors I've talked about have been key.
This is just a personal question. You mentioned Silicon Valley, and it sort of transcended ecosystem status and has become a country in and of itself. Do you think it has benefited the startup ecosystems, if you will, because any organization, any infrastructure ends up becoming in and of itself, can become a bureaucracy of itself? Is Silicon Valley able to remain agile enough to stay cutting edge, or other parts of the world, due to a whole host of factors, that being one of them, going to overtake that over time, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question.
It's a loaded question, I'm sure, but
you can see, and I welcome input from some of the other panelists, but sure. I think Silicon Valley still, at the end of the day, in the tech sector, lots of roads still lead to the valley, and I think you can never get away from that. Clearly, some of the challenges around there is around talent. Some of it is around just affordable housing and that type of. So sometimes the ecosystem can be a victim of its own success, and obviously, people are now moving out of the valley into other areas nearby for the reasons I've just described. But I think at the end of the day, I think you can't get away from the benefit that the valley brought. And I guess you look at Stanford and the research excellence, and so a lot of the what I've just described has been, the valley has benefited from that. But potentially, it's now got to the point where others may come in, and there's opportunities for others to play a role. So yeah, it's not easy, but sometimes we can be victims of our own success.
Yeah, and I was going to pick up on that, Solveig, and agree with Godfrey. I think Silicon Valley is bursting at the seams. And in fact, there's much more innovation now happening in the city of San Francisco, 50 miles away, than down in the suburban valley, because it turns out the entrepreneurs want to be in cities. That and the fact that Google and Apple have a kill zone for startups around them. And so I think the great opportunity of the pandemic is a lot of people have worked out that they don't need to live in suburban Silicon Valley or expensive San Francisco. They can go home. And we're seeing a lot of talent leaving the valley, not only because of America's policies on immigration, but because of opportunities elsewhere. So I think this is a particularly interesting moment. Belfast is fabulous. Godfrey is way too modest. It is amazing the leadership he has shown. And we actually did a recent MIT case study on innovation ecosystems, and I'll put that in the chat. And Belfast comes out as one of the best in the world. And so having a small regional ecosystem that focuses and playing to Northern Ireland's strengths, so the fact they've got a Godfrey and they went for cybersecurity, not solar technology, which is not always easy in when you don't have much sun, makes a lot of sense. And so in the Emirates, choosing where they want to be world class, I think is really important. And if I might, just to pick up on Dr. Najwa on the diversity, we have long taught in innovation for the early stages, the creativity. I love Godfrey's, lots of money to get a few ideas. You need diversity of inputs to have that creativity. And my colleague, Professor Fiona Murray, has written much about the importance of gender inclusiveness, but here in the United States, there's also racial inclusiveness. There's also cognitive diversity that needs to be included to have those early stages, but then you also need to be inclusive of the different stakeholders. Godfrey has showed amazing leadership out of the university, but you then need government to understand its role. And as Najwa was saying, some governments, some universities create a lot of bureaucracy around research. And so any government, any ecosystem that can make it easier, as I believe they're doing at the TII, make it a little bit easier for the researchers, are going to attract world-class researchers like Professor Ignacio Latorre, are going to attract researchers to their ecosystems. And so I think every ecosystem has an opportunity as we reach peak valley and people don't want to live there. They also have the opportunity that Silicon Valley venture capitalists have discovered. They can get to know startups over Zoom. And so actually the money is coming out of Silicon Valley, the talent is coming out. And so I think there's a real opportunity for ecosystem leaders if they follow a good strategy and have the sort of research roadmap and respect for diversity that Najwa was talking about.
Well, and I can't ask for a better segue back to Dr. Najwa and the diversity question. So if I could go back to
I guess, I mean, Dr. Phil mentioned a lot of the points that I wanted to say about diversity.
Sorry.
And him, no, that's actually absolutely fine. It's it's. I would just like to echo what Dr. Phil has said. So when we talk about inclusiveness, and when we talk actually about diversity, we're talking about gender diversity, race diversity, ethnic diversity, but also, as he mentioned, this cognitive diversity. So basically, the talent that you have. When you have a research center, and actually I would, one of the research centers that we have, the one that I'm heading, you see lots of diversity also on the areas of focus of the people. So whether you have the theoretical people, whether you have the fundamental scientists, or whether you have the applied scientists, usually whenever you have diversity across all the categories that I mentioned, studies have shown that you have a better outcome of your research efforts and actually a better impact. So your research will be more impactful. And then this is basically the point that I wanted to raise about diversity in the workplace and also diversity in the ecosystem. And this is, and the values of diversity, inclusion, and tolerance are things that, they start from the top down in TII. And this is why we managed, as you saw, based on the talent that we have, the global talent we have, this is why we are managing to attract this excellent talent and hopefully retain it in the UAE.
And that is, a particular, obviously we had the opportunity to discuss this subject briefly. And as you mentioned, and Dr. Phil mentioned, the issues of diversity in all aspects have huge impact on the value and quality of the ecosystem and the institutions, and of course the research itself. Now, if I could ask Dr. Najwa, actually, we have a question from our audience. Samir wants to know a very specific question about Bitcoin and other digital assets. And will that affect the research agenda in the Middle East? Should we see more research in these new areas? And I guess a little bit of Dr. Jose, he's asking about the quantum computer impacts and all of them helping. So I'm straddling a little bit of the two areas.
Yeah, I mean, just specifically on this topic, obviously we are, and in the Crypto Center, we work on the building blocks of a blockchain system. We're even working on the implementation of a sovereign blockchain system. So, this is research that is ongoing. Obviously, the beauty that we have at TII is you have multiple centers. So in the crypto team, you look into the fundamental building blocks of a blockchain system. Then, you would look, for example, at the quantum impact. You would look at, the post-quantum candidates that you would also integrate in a blockchain system. So that's definitely something that we have on our roadmap, yes.
Again, it's an exciting time to be living in Abu Dhabi near such an interesting research center. Belfast sounds fascinating. It's just a longer commute, especially during COVID. But to that point, back to Belfast, Dr. Godfrey, another question from Zahid in our audience. How can we remove bias from research? Would a shared country research agenda that I think Dr. Najwa talked about at the beginning help reduce that bias and improve the overall quality of the research output?
Yeah, that is a big question as well. I mean, I think some of the work that we've been trying to do, maybe not so much on the research side, but on the linking up of the ecosystem is can we actually bring the different ecosystems, the cyber innovation ecosystems together? And we have actually an organization called Global Epic, which is trying to bring these various ecosystems. I think there's about 30 now around the world, coming together, talking about what are the challenges, what are the issues, can we remove bias, what about ethical aspects, what about business development aspects. So we've been trying to bring that together as a not-for-profit organization, just to deal with the kind of questions that the bigger questions that you're talking about. And there are a number of these similar questions that are across all the ecosystems that they have to deal with. So it's clearly not easy to do this internationally. I don't profess to say we have it all sorted and agreed and we know what we're doing, but I guess it's the more we can come together and collaborate and discuss, then the more opportunity. I mean, part of the idea behind the link up of the ecosystems is if we link up each leader of the ecosystem, which is why I made the point earlier about the conductor of the orchestra. So if each one of them is connected, then that person can then access their whole ecosystem. So then very quickly you can actually have, maybe 1,000 companies across the world who are part of the various ecosystems, all talking, researchers all communicating. So the types of things that you're talking about around bias, or whether it's talent or whatever, here these are ways to try to help with that. But yeah, to do this globally is a huge challenge. I don't profess to have all the answers to that, but that's just some practical steps that we're doing to try to solve that.
I'm happy to come in on that as well as a recovering diplomat. I think the international connection is really important. And to Najwa's wonderful comments on diversity and inclusion, sometimes those from outside in different countries bring very different perspectives. And so I think science, since the scientific revolution of the 17th century in the West and Arabic scientific awakenings before that, it's often been about connectivity of people with very different perspectives, driving back knowledge with a combination of rigor and relevance. So I applaud Godfrey on what he's doing, not only for Belfast, but connecting with other ecosystems. But picking up on the remarks from Ramses from Barcelona in the previous session, one should not be naive as researchers or governments or corporates about the global enterprise. Not all countries wish to operate in the same way in the scientific and research fields. Some are not great respecters of intellectual property. Some have the 5 stakeholders underpinned by a certain party, often a communist party. And so I think international collaboration is really important, but I think it works most effectively amongst the like-minded, where the stakeholders come together on a voluntary basis rather than being instructed by the party, where individuals work out how they get value from their ecosystem collaboration, and where they respect the international norms about openness of science. And I think we see this in the quantum area, where some are taking an international collaborative approach and others are summoning their nationals home for sort of national security purposes. So I think the international collaboration amongst the willing is really important, but I think in this age, it would be naive to assume that technology did not have a geopolitical element, as it has since the start of the Industrial Revolution. So this is not new, but science definitely benefits from international collaboration under the right terms.
Now, with that, I will 2 things. Unfortunately, we are coming to the end of our time together. We're running just a few minutes long, which is fine. I'll give the panelists just a moment to think about what they, might want to say as their final remarks, thoughts to take away to the audience. I'd also like to mention to the audience, we did get a flurry of questions. They're wonderful questions. Even Dr. Phil has been answering some of the questions live. And so, but what we will try to do is take some of those, group them, and ask some of our panelists to respond, and we will make those answers available to our listeners so that they can follow up and see to the areas, because of course there are many areas we did not have the time to get into today. So we really do greatly appreciate the huge engagement of our audience and obviously the questions now. So if I may, throw it back to the panel for just some last thoughts and words related to this really interesting subject. I mean, Dr. Najwa, you're first on my bar.
I don't really have a quote to end up with, but there are 2 points I would like to emphasize, at the end of this panel. The first one is, something we spoke about is that while some of the research or research outcome that comes from a specific ecosystem might be sovereign or might be protected, collaborative learning and knowledge sharing is very important at a global level and between international organizations. And this is eventually what will lead to the advancement of technologies for a higher impact in the society and for advancing technologies for critical infrastructure. The second point, which I don't think we mentioned it, is that, and I will very briefly mention it now, is that something that is still missing from the scientific community or the research community is a proper communication and proper outreach program. So we still have somehow weak scientific communication, which we all as scientists, we have to work on it, and we have to have the right outreach in order, to inspire talent, and in order to inspire talent to go to the specific areas of knowledge that we need in order to fill the talent pool for the various areas that we are pursuing.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. Dr. Phil?
Let me just agree with Najwa's very sage advice, and I'm delighted to be on a panel with her. I think it's so important that we have panels that also represent inclusion and diversity. One of the people in the question was asking is, what can you do? And one of the things you can do is refuse to serve on a manel, a male panel, and make sure that you are living the inclusion and diversity. And as a historian, I'm in awe of Dr. Najwa's technical capabilities and Dr. Godfrey's ecosystem leadership. As I watch, I think the important thing to realize is that this is a key moment as we open up again after the pandemic. Some things have changed. Some people no longer want to live in Silicon Valley, but have gone home. Talent can be mobile if the country is open to it. And the talent, whether it's entrepreneurial talent or research talent, will go where it's of interest. So in the United Kingdom and across the rest of Europe, a lot of cyber talent will go to Belfast, not for the weather, but for Godfrey and that ecosystem. And I believe, having worked with my friends, mostly in Dubai, but I look forward to getting to know Abu Dhabi and Sharjah better, I believe a lot of talent is now looking at the Emirates as to where to be based because of the strengths, because of the regulation. And my message of hope to others is there's an opportunity now to show that you're open for innovation. Because I think now is a particularly interesting historic moment as we reopen. The technology is speeding up thanks to the research in cyber and quantum, and the opportunities to do good work here truly have become global. So thank you very much, and I've enjoyed being on this panel.
Thank you. And Dr. Godfrey, you get the last word.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, and thank you for the opportunity to be on the panel. I certainly enjoyed it immensely. I should add that the weather in Belfast, while not great, sometimes it is quite sunny, and sometimes it's not quite so bad. Although when people do, I
stand correction. Sorry.
I'm only joking. When people do come, they usually say it's very, very green. Well, that's usually because it rains a lot. But anyway, enough said. If I can maybe just summarize, I guess what we've been talking about, certainly from my perspective, I would say for those interested in the ecosystem development, I would say simply focus on the research, excellence in the research, ensure you have the right innovation and the right entrepreneurship. And globally think internationally and to collaborate and have somebody who's passionate who will conduct that orchestra, and I don't think you'll go very far wrong.
Well, thank you very, very much all. Unfortunately, that is it. That is all the time we have for today to discuss this, what I think is an incredibly important and interesting topic. I want to thank all of the panelists today, Professor Jose Ignacio Latorre, Dr. Ott Velsberg, Professor Ramses Gallego, Dr. Najwa Araj, Dr. Godfrey Gaston, and Dr. Phil Budden. It has been truly my honor and pleasure to have all of you in these discussions today. And I will look forward to all of the many exciting discoveries that will come out of your various research projects and institutions. On behalf of HBR Arabia and MIT Technology Review Arabia webinar series, I'm Sylvia Nicholas. And it has been a pleasure to have this conversation with you today. We hope to see you all at future events.
Thank you, Solveig.
Thank you, Solveig.
Thank you.
Thank you.